Thank you for your time. My name is Betula, and this is Shooting from the Hip. How you doing? Slim, how's it going, buddy?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Not bad, thanks. All two of you watching, thanks for showing up. Today on Shooting from the Hip, we're going to we're going to skirt a bunch of different stuff that may not at least initially feel like they're related, but they do overlap, and we'll illustrate where they overlap. It's not information dense per se, but there is a lot of stuff, right? So we're going to be talking about oneness or connectedness versus separateness and materialism, but the philosophical materialism, right? Which everyday real materialism is just an extension of, right? That essential philosophy and stuff, which does relate to separateness, or how we perceive ourselves, or actually, if you'll recall the last one of the first videos that we did for Shooting from the Hip, where we covered, where we covered subjectivity and objectivity. Subjectivity then you can equate to and relate to separateness and materialism, whereas objectivity tends to be more in line with oneness and the idea of connectedness and stuff like that. Eastern philosophical ideas from Taoism and Chan Buddhism, which is like a Zen Buddhist, or Chan Buddhism is the Chinese version of it, and the Zen Buddhism would be the Japanese version of it, right? So, and concepts like yin and yang and wu wei and how all this stuff kind of relates, and then finally the double slit experiment. So for those of you who are going like the double what, just be patient. And when we get to it, we'll try and hopefully, if we do this right, we'll completely trip you out, right? No drugs are required. Okay, so you ready for the dive?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, excellent. So I think just to get the ball rolling, I'm gonna actually read a dictionary definition of oneness, and then we can start talking. We'll start by talking about it. Okay, so oneness. The word itself is a noun, and it's defined as the fact or state of being unified or whole, though comprised of two or more parts. The oneness of man and nature, for example, right? The state of being completely unified with or a part of someone or something. So you get that, like, I felt a sense of oneness with nature, a feeling of spiritual oneness with others, right? That you have a sense of the connectivity. So you've experienced what's being defined here. I think it would be fair to say everybody's experienced it to some degree, right?
Yeah.
Right. So like if you belong to groups or anything like that, and you have that sense of connection with the group and stuff like that, that's oneness. But we'll dive into it a little more philosophical in terms of what it might actually be, right? So you could almost equate to this idea, which is an Eastern Indian philosophy. It's a big part of Indian religions. This idea of nonduality, where the seer and the seen, there are no difference, right? So they don't see a difference between the subject and the object, right? That's how they see oneness. So connectivity, they call it non-duality. So duality, it again is another way of saying like separateness. It's the way that they express that idea that we're all completely completely separate from one another and completely individualized, which is, to a degree, it is accurate. That does accurately express what and who we are, but we also share a much larger connection to one another. I think Neil deGrasse Tyson was quoted once as saying that we do atomically, biologically, we're all connected to one another. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but so he illustrated it, I think, really good in that one quote, which I'm sure will show up in Food for Thought eventually. But so that's the idea. The non-duality is the interconnection of all things. So it's this idea that even though everything appears and we experience it as being separate, there's a much deeper kind of connection that runs through everything, right? Which I don't think is that strange of an idea or that too outlandish of an idea. Although I could be wrong. Have you experienced anything like that yourself?
Well, I've thought about it at least.
Well, okay. Has it come up in conversation amongst your peer group, like at all?
Not so much. Some friends do speak on topics like this.
Like the idea of oneness and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, one thing I'm pointing to is like we know gravitational waves. They just get passed through the universe very far. You know, these large waves. What if there's more minute waves that we don't notice yet that interconnect us all?
Okay, so I think that kind of is an interesting way to illustrate the point. So it's like all the ripples that make up a wave. The wave doesn't exist without all the ripples, right? And and collectively, all the ripples become the wave. So there's, even though they're distinct entities, or we recognize them, or we can experience them separately, they are in fact intimately related. You don't have one without the other, and I think that's the idea of oneness, right? Like that now you can get into the spiritual or metaphysical and even the religious idea of oneness, like where it's communion with God and stuff like that. But isn't that just another way of saying that you experience the entirety of everything, and that you experience it in such a way that you're no longer separate from it, that you are all of it while you're still the distinct self, right? Or the identity that you recognize as being you, right? Luz, does that make sense so far?
It makes sense to me.
Okay, so hopefully it makes sense to everybody else. So in Taoism, they do skirt this very idea, right? Like they try to. They're a non-dual tradition, and fundamentally, they see it as all being aspects of their own wisdom and mind, rather than the worship of something outside of themselves, like a deity or something like that. So they don't see reality as being this separate thing, that they're not a part of it. They're intimately connected to it, and that's what that connectedness kind of comes from. So when they talk about it, they talk about it in terms of like that, there's the spirit inhabits everything. Well, it's a pretty broad term, and so then you can equate. It might be fair to say that if it's all just energy, then it's all intimate layer. It's all layers of energy, and the division is what we experience. But if it's all energy. The way that we're designed and exist in this reality and our biology, we experience it all as being like completely separate. But the greater reality is that it's not. It's all the same thing. It's just layered infinitely on top of itself that produces what we experience, and it's the layering that we have the awareness of. It's not the energy itself. In part because we're not really designed to experience the energy directly. We are designed to experience the borders in between that distinguishes the different layers or fields of energy within fields of energy. So it goes on infinitely, right? But we only experience a limited spectrum of that thing, but it doesn't make it less real. Make sense so far what I just said?
Yeah. But it would help us with categorization and understanding.
Well, because here's the thing: we use language to articulate ideas, and sometimes a language in itself can't encompass the idea. The scope of the idea is so grand. So then you end up looking for something that you can equate it to that would kind of illustrate what you're talking about. So this is why this whole idea of oneness and connectedness and separateness. It's a conversation that you kind of stumble through, right? Because there's no way to talk. There's no words that actually are designed to talk so that you can talk about it.
Right.
Right. It's concepts and ideas. You try to conceptualize the whole thing in your mind. So if you look at an object, it doesn't matter what the object is, and you go, that's the entirety of all energy that there is, that comprises everything, like everything. So everything within your field of view. So all of that is one thing, and then that one thing is subdivided in minute ways and has in infinitely minute ways, and it all relates. Each of those divisions relate to one another, and that it creates what we're experiencing, right?
Yeah, it's hard to share this holistic experience, so we use like the kind of rough tools we have, like language and
Right.
general experiences. Like, example, does a tree make sound when it falls? It's like,
In a forest, yeah, if there's no one there to hear it, right? So, and then, it's one of those things that it could be a bit of conundrum. You can make the argument it does make a sound, but then only is there a sound only because there's someone to hear it? If there's nobody to hear it, does it actually make a sound?
right.
Well,
It's hard to answer strange questions without using strange
right,
words.
right. So in tiptoeing into this, I'm trying really delicately to be able to present in such a way that hopefully that I'm making it easy to understand and not confusing the issue too much. So those of you watching, let me know if you think that I'm just being confusing, which wouldn't be the first time somebody said that about me. All right. So having said that, so we'll move on to the ideas of like yin and yang. So, and it's it's a Taoist concept, and it's the idea is the unity of opposites. So that it means that, and the diagram illustrates. Everyone's aware of the yin and yang symbol. It illustrates the point that we're talking about, in that, like, as a two-dimensional representation of what we're talking about. It perfectly illustrates it, that you have two opposing forces, and then within each of the opposing forces there has to be elements of the other force, and then there's a border that delineates the two opposing forces and encapsulates it. So it's the border of the circle, and then the way the circle is divided, right? And then the smaller circles within those divisions, the teardrop divisions, right? So when you think of that, it actually speaks to, like, here, the entirety of the circle is the whole, everything, right? And that no one thing is unto itself alone. It always has elements of the other thing within it. So we're intimately connected with everything, even the things that we think that are like completely opposite of what we are. Okay, so is that confusing?
No,
Okay.
I was going to make it more confusing.
Oh, we're that's okay. That's why we're here. Okay, so just bear in mind, we're just thinking out loud. You shouldn't necessarily believe anything that we may or may not be saying. The point is, this is a thought exercise, and the idea is to play with ideas and to think about them in a way, and then to ask, is there anywhere in the course of the discussion of that idea where it overlaps with the reality that you experience? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, you still have to have a job, and you make money, and you need access to resources so that you can have access to the materials you need to have a successful living. Like, none of us are free from that. We're all tied to that experience of this reality. But this reality, having said that, this reality isn't just that experience. It's much, much larger. And then the question becomes, is there a way to actually experience that? So is oneness the ability, or does it represent the capacity to experience the entirety of all reality? What is all of reality other than energy, right? So it's endless amounts of energy that's layered in on top of one another, and then, like the lines within the two-dimensional image of the yin and yang symbol, the lines are the things that we experience, right? So we experience it on a gross scale, and we experience the divisions, but we don't necessarily really have the appreciation of those large open fields. That's something that we kind of, it's because our biology is not designed to allow for us to exactly experience it. But this is the great thing about the human mind. We can conceive it, you can conceptualize it, so you can turn it into an idea that we can talk about. Is it true? Right? So when we get to some of the more interesting things that quantum physics is saying, and again, I promise to make it really accessible, but when you hear it, you'll just go like, it's all fucking weird. Like all of it. There's nothing that's not weird, right? So anyway, so when we get there, we'll dive deeply into it. So having said that, so the philosophical concept that yin and yang describes is that opposites that are interconnected forces, and so that's what we are. We're the manifestation of all these interconnected forces. So we're those contour lines. Each of us as an individual, we're made up of both of all that available energy. We're made up of all of it, but we experience it, like I said, as ourselves. Like, so the identity that you're accustomed to, the familiarity of the world and the environment you live in, you know, that's the delineation. So that's the lines, but all of it's all interconnected once you get just below the surface, right?
Yeah, once you look at the symbol, if you go across any of the borders, like around the white circle or the black circle,
or it's teardrop, is what you mean, yeah. Like,
oh, I mean the inner one.
Oh, the inner circles, right? Correct. Yeah. Okay.
Either way, you have like, depending on how you're going around the circle, you have white on the left, black on the right.
Right.
But that's our experience of it. In totality, it's all there.
Right. Yes. Exactly. That's exactly right. So why do I keep using these Eastern concepts and ideas? And it's largely because they attempted to understand this long ago, right? So it's not new to them. So, and they tried to conceptualize reality. Now, is it 100% spot on? I don't know that you can, at least currently, that we could definitively prove 100% unequivocally that it is true. But the idea, remember, the idea here is we're just exploring the idea, right? That's what this is largely about. It's the exploration, thinking out loud, and basically thought exercises. So hopefully that, again, it's not too dry and boring, and that you're actually finding it kind of compelling, because when you do think about it in those terms, it is much more interesting and compelling than you might think, because suddenly what you end up discovering is maybe the whole of reality, all this energy that's floating around, that if you're directly connected to it and you're a direct expression of it, that you can somehow influence it in the divisions that you experience, to influence the kind of experience you are having. I hope that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah. On the emotional spectrum, you could take a patient moment, reflect on how you feel, and then act accordingly. You can actually influence other people's state, even if you're in a bad position.
Yeah, yes, so that's, again, correct. Like, so again, it speaks to oneness, like our connectivity to one another. Even if you get past the metaphysical idea that like somehow we're all like intimately and directly connected to one another, just in terms of like our interactions, you can pass on a positiveness, or at least make people not feel worse than they currently are, by the type of interaction that you choose to have with them, right? So again, that speaks to how we're connected to one another. So then when it's thoughtful and positive, then that's infectious, much like negativity. They spread, but they spread as a result of how we interact with each other. So our emotions and energy, maybe. Right? Because they're energetic in the way that we express them. So does that mean that they're like energy in and of themselves? Maybe not. Maybe. Right? But the whole point is to see them for what they are. That like they'll fuel you in term and influence your behavior to a degree that you can then be either a positive, thoughtful force in the course of a day and your interactions with the other people that you're connected with, or it can be negative. And again, the beauty of all of this is that is the freedom of will, right? That you have the ability to actively make that decision, but it requires you to pay attention. You have to be present, because you have to recognize that that's what you're doing, or that may or may not be going on, or to see how you're actually behaving, so that you can, without judgment, you just see your behavior. And then if it's poor behavior, you'll recognize it as such, and then you adjust accordingly, unless that's what you want, is to behave poorly, right? So then how does that contribute to like our connection with everyone else, our connectiveness or oneness, right? If the idea is that we're supposed to try and integrate both sides, or I don't want to call it the extremes, maybe that, because that's not accurate, but whatever the opposites are, that you want to integrate them in such a way that they're like, so that you walk through this life kind of experiencing it in such a direct way that you're aware of how much you're influencing the lives of others and your own life. Remember, like it all stems from you and comes back to you, right? So does that sound like we're on the right course there?
I think so, yeah.
Oh, okay, so it does make sense. Okay, so just before jumping into the double slit experiment, because that's where it'll get kind of mind blowing. We're just going to quickly recover. We're going to quickly cover separateness, right? And I think separateness is like, in and of itself, is sort of kind of fascinating. This idea that, because that you can get caught up in your individuation, so much so that the only thing you ever see is you. So then you think about, like, that kills your connection to other people, because then your behavior becomes a reflection of that. And so what kind of behavior does it produce other than self-involved, self-serving behavior? So, and it's entirely subjective. So remember what subjectivity is, that you are the reference point, and then and everything's determined as how it relates to you. So even though you make that primary, right? So you make it primary and everything else secondary. And then it's usually at the expense of those around you. We've talked about this before, the idea of exploiting and being exploited, right? And it goes against the idea of natural rights, that like that's where you draw the line, right? But again, if you get so caught up in your own subjective worldview or your separateness, then essentially you treat everything as though it is there for you to use. So separateness can be defined as the property of being separate, right? Which is kind of redundant, but the quality of being not alike, being distinct and different from the otherwise experience of the known. So you could, to a degree, refer to individuality as something of an illusion. It doesn't mean it's not real, but it's illusory in the sense that, like, that subjective view, it has to be balanced with objectivity, yin and yang, right? So that if you lean one way too much without the other counterbalance, it'll produce extreme behavior, extremes in the individual. And so that in those extremes, then that's all it'll manifest as extreme behavior. So think about the worst of what people are capable of, right? And then do you wonder, like, how is that people could even bring themselves to do some of the shit that they do?
Some people might say you have to explore those ideas before you can act accordingly and believe yourself.
I'm in agreement with that. That I think it's important that you to again, yin and yang, the light and the darkness, that you're not one or the other, you're both. And depending on the circumstances and the moment of time, you might lean more heavily one way or the other, but it's this fluid state. It's not like a perfect line. That's why when you look at the yin and yang, they're teardrop shaped, so that it implies movement, right? That means that, like, it's not static. It's not a perfect division, that it's flowing. So that means sometimes you have to fight to pull it back or to push it more forward, right? So in the body, it's referred to as homeostasis. And again, I think we've used the surfer analogy, the idea that like you're the surfer on the board, and the entire time that you're riding the wave, which could, you could equate to energy, that you're seeking balance, because that's how you're able to sustain the ride on the wave, right? Well, you can equate that to life too, and to this idea of separateness and connectedness, that you can't lean one way or the other. Balance is ultimately what you're trying to achieve. And so in the body, it's referred to as homeostasis, where the body's in a constant state of flux and adjusting like its functions to try and so that you have, like, at least in terms of physical health, a balanced physical state, right? And then everything that you do externally with stimuli and the things you consume and stuff like that, all of that influences that attempt at balance, right?
I was thinking it's actually so interesting how many ways balance comes into our life. Because you think about like momentum. In order to keep the high level momentum that I know you do, you have to rest, digest, have these peaceful moments too.
Yeah,
you have to take a break in order to be able to continue speeding up.
Correct, right? So any kind of advancement forward, you can't burn the candle at both ends, right? Not for too long. You can get away with it periodically, but if you're in a constant state of that, that's the equivalent of, you're in a fast-moving car but there's nobody at the wheel and it's heading towards a wall.
That's when it's good to look at yourself and be like, I've worked pretty hard.
I'm either grab the wheel or get out of the car.
Yeah.
Right. So, and this idea of like, hey, how do then the Taoists have a way of viewing? So again, we're focusing a lot on Taoism, and yin and yang has come up, but here's another Taoist concept. So it directly speaks to this idea of balance and stuff like that, and it's referred to as Wu Wei. So Wu Wei is an ancient Chinese concept, literally meaning inexertion or inaction, and it's often translated as effortless action. So it's the effortless effort, which I can appreciate why that might be confusing. But I think a more accurate way to describe Wu Wei or to define it would be to say that you're not forcing the action. You're not forcing anything. What you're trying to do is find the rhythm and flow, the natural rhythms and flow of everything. So if we're all energy, remember that we go back to the yin and yang symbol and the teardrops that are constantly chasing each other. That implies like that there's movement and energy, right? That within that field, that field's not static. It's constantly in a state of movement. And Wu Wei suggests that if you can force your way through it, right? So that's the opposite of Wu Wei. That you can, with intention and physical determination, you can constrain things to work to your advantage. Or you follow Wu Wei, and Wu Wei would mean, or you could be defined and translated as that you harness the natural movement of the flow and rhythm of the energy of everything around you. So then you're moving without effort. I'll illustrate it in an effective way. So think about when you have a dandelion, and they have the little white, the seedlings are just about, and then the wind blows them and stuff like that, and then the little white thing looks like almost like a tiny parachute or umbrella, and it gets carried on the wind to deposit the seed somewhere else. It rides the natural flows of the natural world, and a plant is a living thing. So what it's designed to do is harness the natural movement of the natural world. So that's its connection to outside the fact that it's part of nature. That's how it harnesses the natural forces within the natural world to be able to produce the effect like that we usually only attribute to living things. Living things move from place to place. Well, plants do too, and this is how they do it. They do it. So you could describe that action as being the effortless effort, right? So how to relate this maybe to people more. Think of sailing ships, because that's probably it illustrates it even better. So you have this, it's extremely large, bulky thing made out of wood that floats on the water. And then what you do is you use a large sheet to harness the wind to propel it forward. So it's the big block of wood isn't actually doing anything, right? It's the wind that's doing all the work. So, but it's designed in such a way that it captures the natural movement of the natural world, the natural flow, and then it propels it through the water, right? So Wu Wei is the equivalent of that in terms of like a human being, so that you can move through your life in such a way that you move with the natural rhythms and flow of your day, with the intention to achieve something. So it doesn't mean that you're like aimlessly like a leaf in the wind, although it could be. You could be. What it does reflect is it reflects this ability then to sort of be able to achieve what you want, or the goals you're trying to attain, through this effortless effort, by being balanced, because you can only tap into the natural flow of things in a balanced state. If you're in an extreme state, you're gonna force everything you do. Because it produces extreme behavior. So the application of force to make it happen, you're gonna basically hold things to work or bend them to your will. Whereas here's the option is that you could move naturally, and that in that natural movement, then you can produce the desired outcome without having to force anything. You have the intention to do it, and then you're in a balanced enough state that you're able to flow with it. It doesn't mean that there's no work involved. It just means that you harness the naturalness of everything around you to produce that effect. Seems okay? Does that too far afield? Does that seem like too flighty?
No, I got a perfect thing to add, I think.
Okay, go ahead.
If you think about a boat as a sail, let's call a sailboat. If there's too
What,
much,
you mean like a real sailboat?
I thought so.
Okay, you're right. Okay, sorry.
So there's too much wind, and you want to get there fast. There's too much wind. You're applying too much wind. It's going to tear the boat apart. If there's too much wind, you have to dump the sails.
Or adjust the sails to accommodate for the fact that there is that. But that's the way it's designed, right?
That might change direction.
Sure. Like even on the wind's blowing against you, you can turn the sails in such a way that you can make the sailboat go in the direction you want, even though you're going into the wind. There's a way to harness it, right? So, which to me always found like that. Like how the hell did they do that? And it's because of tapping into the natural flow. You just find a way. So if it's balanced, you can find a way to make it happen. Right?
Yeah, I was gonna say often like you're gonna have to dump the sail, so like turn it so the wind isn't hitting it.
Right.
And that's what I would call like a rest period. But depending on how you're able to manage the wind, the direction, like you don't need as many rest periods. It's this idea of efficiency and like getting back on the horse.
Well, okay, so again, it speaks to the idea of balance, right? So effort versus non-effort and stuff like that. And so Wu Wei's is really it tries to conceptualize that concept, the idea that like things are free flowing and they have spontaneity or spontaneous. And I think the French term is savoir-faire, right? The ability to act or speak appropriately in situations. So, and you do it naturally. You're not forcing it. You're kind of sensitive to what's going on around you, and then able to act and express yourself in a way that's appropriate given what you're experiencing at any moment in time, right? So it's not fighting it. You're not fighting your way. This idea that it's a constant, like struggle's important. Please don't misunderstand. I favor struggle. It's a great way to mold character. It's important, especially in the development of individuals. But But people also need to understand there's much more subtle ways of tapping into living and living your life in such a way that it becomes this effortless effort, right? I know it's because it's never, again, remember, it's not either or. Life is a paradox, so that means it encapsulates both opposites, right? And the yin and yang represent that unity of opposites, and that in that unity you're able then to have balance and to achieve those things you want, maybe in a relatively effortless kind of way. Sounds very appealing. I kind of like that, and that speaks to why we've been drawn to it for so much of my life, right? As soon as I discovered it when I was a very, very young person, it's a concept I've never been able to get too far away from, right? So anyway, having said all that, so I think now we may just jump into the double slit experiment. You're like sitting there going, well, how does that even relate to the idea of balance and wu wei and yin and yang and oneness and separateness and stuff like that? If you give me a moment, I'll try to illustrate how exactly that works, but it's going to require me like breaking down the double slit experiment. So if you give me just a moment of your time, and feel free at any moment to jump in, right? Okay, so what is the double slit experiment? It's one of the most bizarre experiments of modern physics, and it cuts to the heart of the weirdness of quantum mechanics, right? So basically waves that pass through two narrow parallel slits and will form an interference pattern on a screen, right? So that's essentially like the experiment in itself, right? And this is true for all waves. So whether you're talking about light waves, water waves, sound waves, they all behave in the same way, right? So this is energy, right? So this goes back to what we were talking about, the subtlety of everything. And I'm going to illustrate how this will demonstrate some kind of weird connectedness. So the seer is the seen, the observer is the observed. Just stay with me. I promise it'll all make sense. And then hopefully it'll blow your mind, or I'll absolutely fail miserably. Okay, so light isn't just a wave. It's also a particle, and that particle we call a photon, right? So a single photon was shot through the double slits. Even though it was only one photon, it still forms an interference pattern, right? As the photon travels through both slits simultaneously. So it's a single particle that now it's moving through two separate slits. And you go like, but it's a single particle, right? So how is that even possible, right? Weirder still, just by observing the double slit experiment, the behavior of the photon changes. So then the photon goes from its state as a particle to a waveform, right? The idea that the double slit experiment, even if the single photon sent through a slit one at a time, they still act like a wave producing the interference pattern that they're measuring. So that means that the photon at the moment when it's supposed to be going through one of the two slits goes through both. So you go like, wait a minute, how's that even possible? The wave is a probability wave because the experiment is set up so that scientists don't know which of the two slits any individual photon will pass through. So in trying to detect or using sensors in front of the slits to determine which slit the photon really goes through, the interference pattern doesn't show up at all, right? So it defies to some degree what they're expecting it to do. Even weirder still. Okay, so you might be just sitting there going like, that's not very weird. It'll get weird. Scientists use variation of the double slit experiment called delayed choice experiment, using a crystal at each splits. And at each slit, and splits any incoming photons into a pair of identical photons. One photon from this pair should go on to create the standard interference pattern, while the other, observed by the sensor, and attempt to see the logic-defying behavior of photons. The weirdest part, it doesn't work. Even if the second photon is detected after the first photon hits the screen, it ruins the interference pattern. So this means observing a photon can change events that have already happened. So it goes back in time.
Yep.
Right? So, okay, so now you're starting to see how this is mind-blowing? So that means it's not becoming two particles. It's the same particle going back in time at the same time as it first passes through one slit, it passes through the other. So you're like that kind of defies understanding. That doesn't, yeah, and it gets weird even still, right? So currently we remain unsure how this happens exactly. One of the greatest mysteries of quantum mechanics, what we perceive as our, pardon me for just a sec, as an individual is the illusion, right? Because that particle as an individual now is defying our concepts of linear time. So it's in two, bless you.
Thanks.
It's in two places at once, right? So what does this mean in a much larger sense? The idea then becomes that that the observer influences the events of the experiment by simply being there to observe the experiment. So then whatever level of expectation they have going into the experiment, they're going to see what they choose to see. So the observation the observer becomes the observation. The seer becomes the seen, right? And we talked. I hope I did that justice. The idea, this Taoist idea, this nonduality and stuff like that. That you're not one thing, you're everything, and that the fact that you're here and you experience it, and then what you expect in terms of the experience means that you influence what you're experiencing. And so then the term, I think, is that they refer to it is called retrocausality.
Yeah.
Right. So the idea that something happens in the future, so that allow for something to occur in the past, so that future event occurs.
Right. That sounds like time travel, but it's our misunderstanding.
It's because right. It's the way, because we're designed to experience time in a linear fashion, that it moves from past to present to future. That's how we're designed to experience it. But what it
sounds crazy.
Yeah, it does. It absolutely does. Yeah. But what it suggests is time moves like sideways, backwards, forwards, up, down. In the middle. Yeah, like that it double backs on itself. It creates eddies. So think of it. It would be almost accurate then to say that time, or the perception of time, energy, moves like that in the way that water does. So you know how when water, depending on how it's channeled through the environment, it'll do different things, right? Create vortices and stuff like that. Everything does that.
Yeah.
Right? It's just a manifestation of everything at a much larger level. So then if the observer is the observed, or the seer is the seen, then you, to a degree, dictate reality. Right?
This gets even weirder when you consider that there's topological, there's topology to the universe itself, even in an empty vacuum.
Well, but no vacuum is actually empty. It's just
there's some substrate of like energy.
Yeah, always. And so this we talk about it in those terms to try to understand it, but the reality is, again, it's the paradox. It's not actually empty. It's full. So it can be seen as being both empty and full. Where have you heard that before?
Yeah.
Schrödinger.
Yeah, the cat. Schrödinger's cat.
Yeah.
I was thinking about the Copenhagen interpretation
Okay,
and the
well,
Einstein interpretation.
well, okay. To be fair, you should probably then do your best to try and explain them so that people can like understand what you're talking about when you say that. If you don't want to get into that, that's cool. I would rather focus on Schrodinger's cat, right?
Right.
So the idea is that if you have a cat in a box and there's a vial of like poison in the box, and that there's a kind of like that it could kill the cat at any moment in time, that because you can't peer into the box, you can look at the cat as being both alive and dead at the same time, and you don't know which state it's in till you open the box. Well, we just finished talking about that. It illustrates the double slit experiment, right? So then if it's all energy that's responsive to the observation, then you dictate what reality is. So if your choice is to see the worst of what you're experiencing, and then you wonder why there's continuation of the worst of your experiences, it could be related to the fact that the observer's influencing the experience, the observation, what they're seeing, so that you're actually in a weird way dictating the kind of experience you have. And so the more horrible that you think that your experience is, the more horrible the experience becomes. So it becomes what you expect it to become. Because remember, in the double slit experiment, when they tried to change the experiment, and there was an observer there, it changed what occurred, because what they were expecting to occur didn't occur at all, right? Because they came in like with a certain level of expectation, right? So then does that mean then that reality is mutable, or it responds to your level of expectation? You know, I think it's suggestive of that. I wouldn't say it's definitive, but it, like, considering it's one of the greatest mysteries in quantum physics, and it does illustrate that maybe reality's not what we imagine it to be, right? So it speaks more, and I think I've talked about this before, that I think we're just scratching the surface of what it is that we're experiencing when we use the word reality, like what all this is. So last night when we were talking about this, I equated it that modern science and religion and all the explanations provided within the context of our current societies and cultures completely inadequately express and explain the entirety of the reality experience. Not because they're not even good ideas or ways of exploring, but it would be the equivalent of looking or having a painting. So all of reality would be this painting that's 5 feet wide and 10 feet long, right? And all the cultural, social, scientific, and religious explanations for what it is are 1 inch square on that painting, and then the presumption is that 1 inch square that they're able to observe is the entirety of everything. So it doesn't accurately reflect exactly the entirety of this painting that's enormous by comparison, because they only see a small, very small window of it. And that maybe this idea of Wu Wei is that, and again I'll use the yin and yang symbol because it really illustrates it. So this enormous painting we're talking about, it's energy, and that this energy is moving, and that if you can tie into the rhythm and flow of it, which might, again, you could equate to being like the having an expectation of a particular outcome, and then it manifesting that outcome because you're expecting to see it, or defying what you're expecting to see. Does it somehow equate to us like being able to therefore then like dictate what the entirety of it is or isn't? I hate to talk like that because it's.
This actually ties back to what I was talking about with Copenhagen. I think I can explain it
Sure,
well enough.
go ahead.
I'll try to do it quickly. but I think in the Copenhagen interpretation, it was that like if you take a photon, it has a probability within the like we
When
see
it's
it,
what is that when it's acting as a wave? The photons like is a single particle.
yeah, we see it as a particle through observation, but it's a wave. It has its own probability
Right.
in function.
Right.
So when you actually look at it, you collapse the probabilities
Into what it might actually be.
right. So you get like a real solid result. And this ties into the spooky action at distance that Einstein talked about.
Yeah. Particle entanglement.
Yeah, I prefer that term, but spooky action at
It's
distance sounds fun.
it's a great way to describe it.
But yeah, Einstein was saying that if you take the same photon, put it through a filter, or you put it through a splitter, they each have different filters. You're gonna notice as soon as you put one through the one filter, the other one's the opposite.
It responds in the same way.
Yeah, it responds in that way continuously. But the interesting thing is that no matter the distance, so there's no way for those two
Right.
particles to communicate.
So then maybe then it speaks to the idea that there's like no distance as we perceive it. Right. That everything's just like literally right next door to you. So it's all one thing, right?
The way I see it, it seems like the Copenhagen interpretation and Einstein's interpretation aren't mutually exclusive. They both can exist in this weird kind of reality. If there is this larger picture.
I think it's fair to say. So I mean, as crazy as this all may sound, and as crazy as we may sound, I think it illustrates the point that the idea is that the universe is not only stranger than we imagine; it's stranger than we can imagine because we're not really designed to experience it in its entirety. Right, we're only designed to experience it in a small way. But if you listen to some of those mystical and spiritual traditions and stuff, make me one with everything. Right, like that maybe that you can have a greater, maybe not experience it in its entirety, but maybe you can have a greater perception of what it is that we find ourselves living in. I mean, we're tumbling through these ideas and trying to see like, hey, how does that affect like the fact that like you got to go to work tomorrow, like, right?
Yeah.
Like, so that maybe the experience you're having at work, that it doesn't have to be like necessarily a shitty experience. You don't have to bring it there, right? Because if the whole day is just potential, and as you walk through the day you're miserable, you collapse the potential into that reality. So if it's misery that you're kind of focused on, and then that's the richness of your kind of bodily experience, the emotional experience, and the thoughts you're thinking, that maybe it perpetuates it in the reality you're experiencing from moment to moment to moment. It's so you go like, what? So that maybe then it is this idea of having gratitude, even learning to be grateful for poor experiences, because there's something that just to be able to see something beneficial in them, that you learn something. And don't get me wrong, like I understand the level or the degree of like how horrible some people, the experiences they have in this reality. But Viktor Frankl, like he survived concentration camps, and he came out of there not embittered, but having like a general love for life and for humanity as a whole. So I'm like, so there's proof then that you can find beauty in misery, and again that they're not exclusive, right? They're not mutually exclusive. And I think indifference is the thing that kills most people. It robs you of your spirit, it robs you of your energy, and then you just spend all your life in these routines, this repetitive behavior that you can't escape from, and then it's just an empty, shallow existence when you could be experiencing like the richness of everything.
Yeah. People celebrate on Friday because it's, last day of the work week, but there's so much more, and there's something to celebrate every day.
100%. And so having gratitude or cultivating that, again, this goes back to, like, I don't know if you recall, or if any of you who are watching this watched Shooting from the Hip. The very first episode was titled Self-Realization, and the underlying theme was self-mastery. That it speaks to this, what we're talking about now, speaks to that you can train yourself in such a way that no matter what you're experiencing, that you dictate the experience. It doesn't have to be enormously horrible. It does not mean that you will not feel pain, and it does not mean that you'll be like walking around deluded state where you don't recognize the misery of what's happening. But what you don't do is you don't dwell on it, right? So there's the difference, right? Not, you're able to see past it and go, here, there's more to the experience than just this point of misery. And like I've often said, almost everything that you experience is temporary, and if you wait long enough, it'll all get replaced by something else. So now here we're talking about that thing that could replace it could be more of the same. So if you walk through life with a certain level of expectation, and your expectation is for it to be all the worst things that occur, then it would be fair to say then that's the kind of stuff you'll experience. So
Yeah, the suffering that's inherent with life doesn't necessarily have to come at the cost of your life. It could just be a part of it.
Right. Well, but because again, I would go so far as to say that the suffering's self-induced, right? And it's usually this is what we're talking about. The individual not being able to let go of the initial pain, right? Because pain's almost always temporary. It's never a constant state. It's rare. I shouldn't say it's never. But it's not usually a continual state. It's usually the result of some stimuli that's kind of like potent and extreme. But you can perpetuate that pain, and that it becomes misery and suffering by allowing it to be your focus, right? So then it requires you to sort of to be smarter and to approach life in a different way, and to live it more like wholly and completely. And that there's ways to do it. You can tap into make an effort to try and tap into the natural flow of life that as you're experiencing it. Again, to effortlessly to reach the things that you're striving for. And that it's goal setting's good. Especially if it's challenging. Again, right? Remember the struggle to accomplish something, to overcome the challenge, is enormously beneficial to the development of any person, and that maybe our reality then is no more than just an extension of that, right? Like that, it becomes this perfect playground that adapts to what you expect, need, or want from it, even though because those things aren't exactly all the same thing. Like what you need, what you want, and your expectations, they are slightly different things, but they're the ones that might kind of be predictors of the kind of experience you're going to have within this reality, right?
If I could suggest that maybe we have this option to change the future, which in quite literal material means we can. You do what you do now, it's going to change the future.
Yeah, I agree.
If you try to at least see yourself as someone who you can't escape the tragedy, but if you could get through the tragedy and still have what you need of yourself, like you could still stand up straight, believe in yourself, have these
and still carry on and have a full and compelling life, and the ones that's consistently satisfying and brings you a great sense of self and satisfaction. I go, isn't there more value in that than net worth? Right? Like I'm asking. So, and
I think that individual benefits everybody, not just themselves.
I would agree too. Because remember, if the seer is the seen or the observer is the observed, and you have large numbers of us who feel and think in the same way, are they then as a collective having a larger influence on reality. So then, if you wanted to keep everyone divided, you have them favoring unrealistic expectations, and then they're constantly divided. There's no sense of unity. And remember, what is the yin and yang? It's the unity of opposites, right? So, and we can equate that to being subjectivity and objectivity. You bring them together, and then you're not one or the other, you're both.
I've seen some weird YouTube videos. I won't say specifically what.
Yeah.
But it's almost like yin and yang in the real universe. It almost looks like just fractals going into each other, and it's this beautiful collage of just different colors. Like,
well,
it's hard to visualize. But.
Well, but it speaks. I like your choice of language, like the idea that like it's all beautiful, and it's not beautiful only because you're not paying attention. Right? You see the beauty in the natural world. You see the beauty in the individuals that you encounter, that you can, right? And then maybe that's the point. Maybe the point is to just be grateful and revel in the experience, and then have respect for other things. But most of us are so well conditioned to compete and stuff like that there's a certain degree of comfort in exploiting others to their own end, and they'll be the first ones to tell you how that, like, no, it's not personal. I love you. You're good. It's all lies. It's language of convenience to veil their actual intention or their actual behavior and stuff like that. So is there gratitude in that? No, that doesn't come from gratitude. That comes from somebody who's petty, or maybe even envious, or just who resents like that they resent someone else, right? So then they just see them as something either to use or discard. When they go, maybe that's kind of the problem, right? The fact that we do that, and that we allow for ourselves to be so lopsided, that because a balanced person, I dare say, wouldn't do that. It doesn't mean that you're not. It's kumbaya. We're gonna be holding hands and singing together. Like, it couldn't be further from the truth. You were going to have. It means that the way you deal with any kind of conflict is through confrontation, without it becoming a physical confrontation. You're able to just communicate effectively, to understand, and that's what balance produces. The ability to understand and for a moment to suspend your own self-interest and your self-view, and then to sort of be able to to try and resonate with the view of the opposition. So is that the unity of opposites? Is that balance? I'm asking. Maybe not.
It's hard to find a strict definition.
No, because I think you're right. I don't think there is.
Yeah, but I would say I agree. I was just thinking about how when I was younger, I couldn't really help my dad at work. One of the things he would say is like, one of the most helpful things you can do is just step aside, just be out of the way for now. And that's the nicest thing you could say to a friend, I think. If they're offering you help and you either don't need it, or it's not a friend and they're trying to take advantage of you, you should never be mad at somebody for them saying, like, I need space. Because individuality. Individuality? Ah, damn.
All right, it's okay.
But it's
I
very
get tongue-tied too. I think so too. Again, we're the collective, but you're also the individual, and you should be cultivating yourself as the individual. The question is, what kind of individual are you cultivating, right? And so we've seen from what we've just looked at today in terms of the materials that it's unlimited. You can become virtually anything you envision yourself to be, right? So then why would you present and envision yourself anything other than the highest expression of what you could be? Right, because it's just way easier to be distracted or to drown in your distractions of choice, because then that way you don't have to face your life. You don't have to, you don't have to give a shit about anyone else. But that's a cold, miserable, sad existence, man. Like I don't know about you, but I certainly don't want to live like that. Right?
No, it sounds like being a teenager for the rest of your life. That sounds terrible.
That's funny. Yeah, no, I don't think I want to live with that kind of angst for the rest of my days. Yeah, I'd rather strive for balance, and there's value in balance, and that the idea that maybe that we can influence the outcome of reality just by how we choose to see it or experience it and stuff. And again, this isn't being stupidly happy or this kind of like positivity where you're at the expense of good reason and judgment. It's the balance of all of that, right? But you don't allow yourself to become like overwhelmed by any one aspect of it. You try to integrate all of it. Wow. So maybe that's what it's all about. It's ultimately about complete integration of everything, right?
I'm not sure how this integrates to the conversation, but I thought this would be interesting to bring up. The physical reality we live in is made of energy and matter.
But what is matter other than like energy in a different form, right? Like
right,
so it's all just energy.
So I think we have one good question: what is energy? And it's so strange because it's in so many forms, like physical compact matter. You have your kinetic energy. You have thermal
Right.
energy, which may or may not be very similar,
Okay, right.
depending on who you ask. But it's strange. There's so many forms of energy, but we consider it untouchable unless it has something to do with circuitry that we've built, like unless it's under our current understanding of technologies. We
Right.
don't
Well,
accept
but again,
everything.
it just reflects again a limited understanding. When you have the capacity to have a much grander understanding of everything that goes on around us, right? So I often, because I think I've heard it said before, and I'm not sure if it's like in metaphysical circles or not, but because I can't exactly remember, but that some equate consciousness to being is just again and more energy. So then if it's going back to how we opened, that if it's all just energy and it's all infinite layering of energy, and what we experience is like the borders of the actual layering, that's where we exist. We experience only the borders in the that are used to define all the different layers of energy, reality, or consciousness. Maybe it's all the same thing. Well, I think that we illustrated that it is all the same thing. So then maybe we should act in such a way that we influence it in a healthy, balanced way, that we can, or that maybe that's the takeaway from here, that you can, right? But maybe balance is the goal. I don't know if we did that in a super roundabout way or not, but
I think there's a little bit of variety, a little bit of balance.
well, it was certainly it certainly played out a lot more differently than I expected it to, right? In terms of, but it's still, I think there's value in this idea that your expectation versus like what you experience, but how somehow that the level of expectation does influence the actual experience. So
This topic just keeps going back into itself, and it's
right, because
confusing.
it's like a snake eating its tail. It just moves in a circle, and maybe that's the point.
Yeah.
Right, it's the paradox of it. There's no right answer here. It's never one thing. It's whatever opposites you imagine them there to be. It's all of them. So it's having the perspective where you step far enough back that you're able to see things in their entirety, and then you recognize that all of it is one thing. It's not separate. We just experience the separation. So this really does go back to the idea of oneness. It's one thing, right? Your consciousness and my consciousness are not separate. We experience them separately, but they're one thing.
Right.
So anybody who's watching this, their consciousness and ours are not separate. They're one thing. That applies to everything that you can see, touch, taste, smell, and hear. So it's universally true that it's all one thing, and we're designed to experience it in a very specific way. but that doesn't mean that it's not all one thing. Can I get a time check?
Right now it's 3 o'clock.
No, I mean, like how long have we been running?
We're an hour and 10 minutes in.
I think maybe we're close to like maybe summing this up. I think like I don't know if we successfully managed to illustrate the point that like maybe that ultimately all this, that you should be striving for balance, and that all of it is, everything is interconnected, right? Whether you experience it or not as being that way, that doesn't detract from the idea that it is, right? And again, it's just an idea, so like you don't have to agree with it. You can think I'm crazy and full of shit, and you'd be right to do so. I mean, but it's something that's maybe worth considering, because even though it's part of the lexicon of the human experience, it might be a more accurate reflection of all experience. That it's all connected, it's all one thing, it's not, and we just experience it separately, right?
This is a very fun conversation.
Yeah, but it just keeps moving in circles.
I know you want to end it. I know I want to end it, but at the same time, there's so much to go over, because we could think about identity.
Yeah, well,
There's-
because it does
Yeah.
dovetail into every aspect of what we are, right? But I'm like, I go, it might be more advantageous just to simply like close and go, like, because ideas of identity and stuff like that, again, like it's a mental construct. How real is it?
Next time we do recording, we'll just swap names.
Is that what we're gonna? Remember, it's how you choose to identify. But here, we'll close with this. So, how real is the way is that who you envision yourself to be, and the identity you promote? How real is it? Or is it just a product of your thinking and your mind? So it's a mental construct, this image of who you think you are. Then the question becomes, well, what if that's just a construct? It's just something that we create as a navigational tool, so through the reality we're experiencing. Then what are you really? Well, if you don't have to go that deep. You go one layer lower, and you realize that, well, your self-awareness, your awareness. And that awareness, it doesn't have an identity, it doesn't have a religion, it doesn't have a gender, it doesn't have weight, it doesn't have size. None of those things that we assign to our identity exist in the awareness, right? The identity is, like I said, we've said it before, that it's a product of your ego and the stimulus independent thought and the default mode network of your brain. It creates these things. But again, so this idea that the individual is in part an illusion, right? It's a personal delusion. It's how we imagine ourselves to be. Don't take that the wrong way. It's important in the sense that it's a requirement within this experience, but it's not who you actually are. It's just an expression of who you are. So it could be seen as being art. So if you do it really well, then your identity becomes this wonderful, artful expression of you. But that only comes as a result of somebody who's balanced, somebody who no longer favors their identity or treats it with significant value. What they do is they look for a deeper experience, and the deeper experience is that awareness, that the you that's paying attention when there's no words coursing through your head, you're not identifying and evaluating and judging things. It's just the you who's experiencing something. It's the pure observer. It's pure objectivity, right? So again, it's not that it's unreal. It's real in the sense of the way it relates to reality. But is it a real thing? I know that sounds confusing, but if you follow it, don't get lost in the words, but if you follow it, how real is it? It would be it would almost be accurate to say that it's a mask you're wearing, right? So then we see the mask and we think the mask is what you are. It's not. It's the face behind the mask, right? That's who you really are. And so, and in this case, that face is just awareness, it's consciousness. This thing that defies description, defies any kind of metric or any capacity to measure, and yet we all have it and we all experience it. And it speaks to the weirdness and the wonderfulness that we just finished going through with a double slit experiment and trying to jump into like more deeper, profound physics, to, at least to illustrate just how weird all this shit is, right? And maybe that's the final point. It is all weird, and that if there's any point to all of this, it's to find balance, or maybe to connect, take off the mask and connect with the real you. Does that seem like a good place to close?
Yep.
Okay. I'd just like to say thank you for your time. I'm sorry?
Question everything.
Oh, yes, 100%.
Can't forget that.
Yeah, I can. Please question everything. Thank you for your time.